The crimson dawn painted the Wyoming sky as Catherine Foster quietly saddled her horse, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The year was 1878, and the territory had begun to settle, but not enough for a woman alone to feel safe, especially one running from shadows as dark as hers. The Morgan horse beneath her shifted impatiently, sensing her urgency. The saddle leather creaked as Catherine tightened the cinch with practiced hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, belying her otherwise calm demeanor. 6 months at the Rockingham Ranch had been the closest thing to peace she'd known in years, but peace never lasted long in her experience. "Going somewhere, Miss Foster?" The deep voice startled her, though she refused to show it. Catherine didn't turn around immediately. She knew who stood behind her: Preston Ivers, the ranch foreman. He had a way of moving quietly for such a tall man. "Mr. Ivers," she acknowledged, finally facing him. "I'm just taking an early ride." Preston leaned against the barn doorframe, his hat tipped back to reveal eyes as blue as a summer sky. At 30, he was only 4 years her senior, but carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. "With all your belongings?" His gaze flicked to her saddlebags, bulging with what little she owned. Catherine's chin lifted. "I don't see how that's your concern. The boss hired you to teach his children. You leaving those kids without saying goodbye?" Guilt flashed across her face. "They'll be fine. Mrs. Henley can take over their lessons." Preston straightened, crossing the distance between them with long strides. "They won't be fine. They adore you. Everyone here does." "I have to go?" she whispered, turning back to her horse. "Why?" The simple question hung in the air between them. Catherine had prepared for anger, perhaps even indifference, but not this gentle inquiry that threatened to unravel her resolve. "I just do." Preston moved closer, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that always seemed to accompany him. "Catherine," he said softly, using her given name for the first time since she'd arrived. "Whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Catherine shook her head, swinging up into the saddle with practiced ease. The horse pranced beneath her, eager to run. "I'll be gone before anyone else wakes," she said, refusing to meet his eyes. "Please tell the children I'm sorry." Preston's hand shot out, grasping the horse's bridle. "At least tell me where you're headed." "Let go, Mr. Ivers." "Preston," he corrected. "After 6 months of working together, I think you can call me by my name." Something in his tone made her finally really look at him. What she saw in his eyes stole her breath. Not pity or judgment, but something far more dangerous. Understanding. "Please," she whispered. "I need to leave." His grip on the bridle loosened. "I won't stop you, but I will follow." Catherine frowned. "What?" "You heard me. If you're determined to ride out, I'll be right behind you." "Don't be ridiculous. You have responsibilities here." Preston shrugged. "I've already spoken with Mr. Montgomery. He gave me leave to take some time." "You?" "What?" Confusion clouded her features. "You knew I was leaving?" "I suspected. You've been looking over your shoulder more than usual this past week. Ever since that stranger came asking questions in town." Catherine paled. So Preston had noticed. She shouldn't be surprised. He noticed everything. "This isn't your fight," she said firmly. "Maybe not, but I'm making it mine." Catherine shook her head, nudging her horse past him. "Goodbye, Mr. Ivers." She urged her mount into a trot, then a gallop, feeling the cool morning air against her face as she raced away from the ranch that had almost felt like home. She didn't look back, couldn't bear to see if Preston was watching her go. The sun had just cleared the eastern horizon when she reached the ridge overlooking Timber Creek. Catherine reined in her horse, allowing the animal a moment to catch its breath. That's when she heard it, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats behind her. Turning in the saddle, she saw Preston approaching on his big buckskin gelding. He was dressed for travel, with a bedroll tied behind his saddle and saddlebags that suggested he wasn't planning a short trip. Anger and something else, something warmer, battled within her chest. "I told you not to follow me." Preston pulled his horse alongside hers. "And I told you I would." His expression was infuriatingly calm. "I'll ride every sunrise with you, Catherine, until you decide to stop running. You have no idea what you're getting into. Then enlighten me." Catherine stared at him, this stubborn cowboy who refused to let her disappear. Part of her wanted to tell him everything about Edward Blackstone, the wealthy rancher who had pursued her relentlessly after her father's death, about his rage when she'd refused his advances, about the fire that had consumed her family home with her younger sister inside. "It's complicated," she said instead. "Most things worth caring about are." Preston adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "Where are you headed?" Catherine hesitated, then sighed. "Montana Territory. I have a cousin in Helena who might take me in." "Montana it is, then." Preston nodded as if they were discussing nothing more significant than a day trip to town. "You're impossible." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "So I've been told. Stubborn as a mule, my mother used to say." Despite herself, Catherine felt an answering smile tug at her mouth. "Your poor mother. She'd like you," Preston said, his eyes warm on her face. "She always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me get away with anything." The casual intimacy of his words sent a flutter through Catherine's stomach. "I'm not that person," she said quickly. "We'll see." Preston gestured toward the trail ahead. "Shall we? If we make good time, we can reach Thompson's Creek by nightfall." Catherine knew she should refuse his company, send him back to the safety of the ranch. But the thought of facing the long journey alone and what might be waiting at the end of it made her hesitate. "One day," she said finally. "You can ride with me for one day. Then you go back." Preston nodded, though something in his eyes told her he had no intention of honoring that agreement. "One day it is." They rode in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Catherine found herself stealing glances at Preston, wondering why he would risk so much for a woman he barely knew. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked finally. Preston didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "Do you remember when I first brought you to the ranch?" Catherine nodded. She'd been half-starved and desperate, having lost her teaching position in the previous town when Edward's rumors had followed her there. "You had every reason to be broken," Preston continued, "but instead you were fierce. I watched you with those children, bringing laughter back to a house that had been silent since Mrs. Montgomery passed. I watched you face down every sideways glance in town with your head held high." He turned to look at her, his gaze intense. "Whatever you're running from, Catherine, you deserve someone at your side for the fight." Emotion clogged her throat, making speech impossible. No one had fought for her before, not her father, who had gambled away their security. Not the townspeople who had believed Edward's lies. Not even her own sister, who had begged Catherine to accept Edward's proposal for their financial security. "You don't know me," she managed finally. "I know enough," Preston replied simply. They reached Thompson's Creek as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small settlement. It wasn't much a trading post, a livery stable, and a handful of rough cabins, but it offered shelter for the night. The proprietor of the trading post, a grizzled man named Jeremiah, greeted Preston like an old friend. "Ivers, ain't seen you in these parts for a spell. What brings you through?" "Just passing through with Miss Foster here," Preston replied easily. "Need a place to bed down for the night." Jeremiah's eyes traveled to Catherine, curious but not unfriendly. Got a room in the back. It ain't fancy, but it's clean. You two married? No, Catherine said quickly, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. I can sleep in the stable, Preston offered. Nonsense. Jeremiah waved away the suggestion. Got 2 cots in there, proper like. No need for anyone to bunk with the horses when there's a roof to be had. Catherine couldn't help noticing the small smile that played at the corners of Preston's mouth as he thanked the older man. He was enjoying her discomfort, the scoundrel. After a simple but filling meal of beans, biscuits, and coffee, Catherine found herself sitting on the porch of the trading post, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. Preston joined her, offering a steaming cup of coffee. Thought you might want this, he said, settling beside her on the rough-hewn bench. Gets cold quick once the sun's gone. Thank you. Catherine wrapped her hands around the warm cup. For the coffee and for not asking questions in front of Jeremiah. Preston nodded. Not my story to tell. They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds creating a peaceful backdrop to their thoughts. His name is Edward Blackstone, Catherine said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. He was the most powerful man in our county back in Kansas. After my father died, leaving us with nothing but debts, Edward offered to solve our problems. Preston remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. At first, I was grateful for his attention. He was wealthy, respected. But then I realized the price of his generosity. Catherine stared into her coffee, seeing reflections of the past. He wanted ownership, not partnership. When I refused his proposal, he became obsessive, dangerous. Did he hurt you? Preston's voice was carefully controlled, but Catherine could hear the anger beneath the surface. Not physically. But he destroyed my reputation, made it impossible for me to find work. And then, she took a shuddering breath. There was a fire at our home. My sister, Lily, she didn't make it out. Catherine. Preston's hand covered hers, warm and steadying. I'm so sorry. I can't prove he said it. But I know, Preston. I know he was responsible. Tears slid down her cheeks. And now he's found me again. That stranger in town was one of his men. If I stay in one place too long, he always finds me. Preston's jaw tightened. Then we keep moving until we find a way to stop him. We. Catherine looked up, meeting his intense gaze. Yes, we. His hand squeezed hers gently. I told you, I'll ride every sunrise with you. I meant it. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection deeper than friendship, more complex than simple attraction. Catherine felt it like a physical force, pulling her toward this man who had chosen to stand with her against an enemy he'd never met. You should get some rest, Preston said softly, releasing her hand. We'll leave at first light. Catherine nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Good night, Preston. Good night, Catherine. As promised, they departed Thompson's Creek at dawn, the eastern sky ablaze with color. They rode harder that day, Preston setting a pace that ate up the miles while still being manageable for their mounts. We need to change direction, Preston announced when they stopped to water the horses at midday. Catherine frowned. Why? Helena is northwest of here. And that's where Blackstone will expect you to go. Preston unfolded a well-worn map. If we head west through the mountains, we can reach the Idaho Territory, then turn north. It's a harder trail, but less traveled. You think he's already following us? Preston's expression was grim. I think we should assume he is. Better to be cautious. Catherine studied the map, tracing the route Preston suggested with her finger. That's a lot of wilderness between settlements. I know these mountains. My father was a trapper before he settled down to ranching. I spent half my childhood on these trails. His confidence reassured her. All right, west it is. The terrain grew steadily more challenging as they climbed into the foothills of the Teton Range. By late afternoon, they were picking their way along narrow trails that wound through pine forests and rocky outcroppings. There's a hunter's cabin about 2 miles ahead, Preston said as dusk approached. We can shelter there tonight. The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room structure with a stone fireplace and a dirt floor. But it offered protection from the elements and prying eyes. Home sweet home, Preston joked as he set about starting a fire while Catherine unsaddled their horses. Working together, they soon had a small fire crackling in the hearth and a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee warming their bellies. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering on the cabin's roof. I never thanked you properly, Catherine said as they sat before the fire, for coming after me. Most men wouldn't have bothered. Preston looked at her across the flames, his face half in shadow. I'm not most men. No, she agreed softly. You're not. Something in her tone made his eyes darken. He leaned forward slightly. Catherine. A sudden crack of thunder interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Their horses whinnied nervously outside the lean to where they'd been sheltered. I should check on them, Preston said, rising to his feet. Catherine watched him go, her heart racing from what had almost happened. She pressed her hands to her cheeks, feeling the warmth there that had nothing to do with the fire. The rain continued through the night, transforming into a steady downpour that made travel impossible the next morning. They were forced to remain at the cabin, a circumstance that filled Catherine with both relief and tension. We can use the time to plan, Preston said as they shared the last of their coffee. Once we reach Idaho territory, we'll need to decide whether to continue north or find a place to make a stand. Make a stand? Catherine looked at him in alarm. Against Edward? That's madness. Running forever is madness, Preston countered gently. Sooner or later, we need to end this. How? He has money, influence. I have nothing. You have me. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Catherine shook her head. I can't ask you to risk your life for my problems. You didn't ask. I offered. Preston leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. Catherine, I've known you for 6 months. In that time, I've seen your courage, your kindness, your strength. What I feel for you. It's not something I've ever felt before. Her breath caught. Preston, let me finish. He took her hands in his. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking you to believe that you're worth fighting for. That we could have something worth fighting for. Tears blurred her vision. I'm afraid, she whispered, not just of Edward, but of this, of caring for someone again, of having something to lose. Fear's not always a bad thing, Preston said, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. Sometimes it just means you've found something worth protecting. Catherine looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. The honesty she saw there broke through defenses she'd built since that terrible night in Kansas. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Preston leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a first exploration rather than a demand. Catherine found herself responding, her hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally separated, both were breathing unevenly. Preston rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since you first arrived at the ranch looking like a half-drowned cat after that spring storm. Catherine laughed softly. I must have looked a fright. You looked beautiful, he corrected. Fierce and alive and beautiful. They spent the day talking, really talking, sharing stories from their pasts and cautious hopes for a future that suddenly seemed possible. Preston told her about growing up as the son of a trapper turned rancher, about losing his mother to influenza when he was 16, about his dreams of someday having his own land. Catherine shared memories of her sister, of teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in Kansas, of her passion for books and learning. The hours passed in a comfortable intimacy that felt both new and familiar. By the following morning, the rain had stopped and they were able to continue their journey. Something had changed between them, a barrier fallen away. They rode side by side now, rather than one following the other, and their conversation flowed easily. For 3 days they traveled through the mountains without incident. On the 4th day, as they descended into a valley that would lead them to the Idaho border, Preston suddenly reined in his horse. "What is it?" Catherine asked, alarmed by his tense posture. "Riders," he said grimly, "coming up fast behind us." Catherine's blood ran cold. "Edward, can't tell yet, but we need to move." Preston scanned the surrounding terrain. "There's a ravine about half a mile ahead. It narrows to a point where only one rider can pass at a time. If we can reach it, we might have a chance." They spurred their horses forward, racing toward the ravine Preston had mentioned. Catherine could hear the thunder of hooves behind them now, growing louder by the second. "They're gaining," she called to Preston. "Almost there." The ravine appeared before them, a narrow cleft between towering rock walls. They plunged into it, the sudden dimness momentarily disorienting after the bright sunlight. "Here." Preston guided them to a spot where the ravine narrowed dramatically. Dismounting quickly, he drew his rifle from its scabbard. "Get behind me." Catherine slid from her saddle, heart pounding. "I can shoot," she said, drawing a small revolver from her saddlebag. "My father taught me." Preston gave her a quick, approving nod. "Good, but let me try talking first." The riders, 4 of them, appeared at the mouth of the ravine. They slowed to a walk as they approached, clearly wary of the defensive position Preston and Catherine had taken. "That's far enough," Preston called when they were about 30 yards away. The lead rider, a heavy-set man with a thick mustache, raised his hands to show he wasn't holding a weapon. "We're just looking for a woman," he called back. "Catherine Foster. Our employer wants to speak with her." "Your employer being Edward Blackstone?" Preston's voice was deceptively casual. The man's eyes narrowed. "That's right. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Step aside, and you won't get hurt." "I'm afraid I can't do that." The man sighed as if disappointed. "Mr. Blackstone is offering $500 for her return, alive and unharmed. That's good money for stepping aside." "Not interested." The man's expression hardened. "Then we'll take her by force." Preston's rifle didn't waver. "You can try, but only one of you can come through this passage at a time, and I promise the first man who tries won't make it to the other side." A tense silence fell as the men evaluated their options. "He's bluffing," one of the other riders said. "He won't shoot." "Want to bet your life on that?" Preston asked quietly. The leader studied Preston's face for a long moment, then spat to the side. "This isn't over. Mr. Blackstone wants the woman, and what Mr. Blackstone wants, he gets." "Not this time," Preston replied. With a final glare, the leader signaled his men to retreat. They backed their horses out of the ravine, disappearing from view. Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Do you think they're really leaving?" "For now," Preston said, not lowering his rifle. "But they'll be back, probably with more men." "What do we do?" Preston finally turned to look at her, his expression resolved. "We changed the game. No more running." "What do you mean?" "I mean it's time to take the fight to Blackstone." The plan they formulated was daring, perhaps even foolhardy, but it was the only way to end the pursuit once and for all. Instead of continuing to Idaho, they would circle back toward Wyoming territory, toward the nearest federal marshal's office in Cheyenne. "I've been thinking about what you told me," Preston explained as they made camp that night in a well-hidden cave. About the fire, your sister. Catherine tensed. I told you, I can't prove he was responsible. Maybe not directly, but men like Blackstone don't do their own dirty work. They hire it done. Preston added another stick to their small fire. And men who hire out for that kind of work talk, especially when they're facing prison themselves. Hope, fragile but persistent, bloomed in Catherine's chest. You think we could find who actually set the fire? It's worth trying. If we can get to the marshal, make a formal complaint, he might investigate. Especially if we can convince him Blackstone has been crossing territory lines to pursue you. Edward has friends in high places, Catherine warned. Preston smiled grimly. So do I. The marshal in Cheyenne, Jack Harmon, served with my father in the war. He's a good man, honest. If anyone will give us a fair hearing, it's him. The journey to Cheyenne would take them dangerously close to Edward's likely location, but Preston believed the risk was necessary. They traveled by night when possible, keeping to less used trails and avoiding settlements. Despite their caution, trouble found them 3 days later as they crossed a high meadow just after dawn. A shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past Catherine's head close enough that she felt the air disturb her hair. Down! Preston shouted, pulling her from the saddle and into the cover of a fallen log as more shots followed. Their horses bolted, frightened by the gunfire. Catherine found herself pressed against Preston's side, his arm protectively around her as bullets thudded into the log. How many? She gasped. At least 3, maybe 4, Preston replied, peering cautiously over the log. They've got us pinned down. We can't stay here, Catherine said, panic rising in her throat. No, we can't. Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Take this, he said, pressing it into her hand. What is it? Proof. His eyes met hers, intense and determined. Letters I found among Blackstone's men when they were sleeping last night. They mention the fire, Catherine. They confirm he ordered it. She stared at him in shock. You went to their camp? Are you insane? A small smile touched his lips. Maybe a little. For you. Another volley of shots peppered their position. When I start firing, I want you to run for those trees, Preston said, nodding toward a thick stand of pines about 50 yards to their right. Don't stop, don't look back. Just get to Cheyenne and find Marshal Harmon. No, Catherine said fiercely. I'm not leaving you. Catherine, no. We go together or not at all. Preston looked like he wanted to argue, but another shot hitting dangerously close made him reconsider. All right, together. But we're going to have to move fast and pray our aim is better than theirs. Catherine checked her revolver, finding it fully loaded. On your count. 1, 2, 3. They rose together, firing toward the rocky outcropping where their attackers were positioned. The sudden counterattack seemed to surprise the gunmen, buying Preston and Catherine precious seconds to dash toward the trees. They were halfway there when Catherine heard Preston grunt in pain. He stumbled but kept moving, his left arm hanging awkwardly at his side. Preston! She cried, reaching for him. Keep going. He urged through gritted teeth. They reached the tree-line, bullets splintering bark around them as they plunged into the protective cover of the forest. Only when they were well hidden did Catherine force Preston to stop. Let me see, she demanded, reaching for his arm. It's just a graze, he insisted. But his pale face told a different story. Carefully, Catherine pushed back his sleeve. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, leaving a deep, bleeding furrow. Just a graze? She repeated skeptically, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind the wound. You're a terrible liar, Preston Ivers. Despite the pain, he smiled. Only to you. They moved deeper into the forest, alert for sounds of pursuit. Preston's injury slowed them, but they managed to put significant distance between themselves and their attackers before nightfall forced them to stop. Catherine helped Preston settle against a tree trunk, concern etching her features as she noted the fever beginning to flush his cheeks. The wound needed proper cleaning and treatment, but they had limited supplies and couldn't risk a fire that might reveal their position. "We need to get you to a doctor," she said, dampening a cloth with precious water from their canteen to cool his forehead. "We need to get to Cheyenne," Preston corrected. "Blackstone's men won't stop coming. You won't make it to Cheyenne if infection sets in." Catherine's voice broke. "I can't lose you, Preston. Not now." He reached up to touch her cheek. "You won't lose me. I promised to ride every sunrise with you. Remember? I intend to keep that promise." Catherine leaned into his touch, tears threatening. "Why? Why did you follow me that day? Why risk everything for someone you barely knew?" Preston's eyes, despite the pain clouding them, remained clear and certain as they held hers. "Because from the moment you arrived at the ranch, I knew you were someone worth following, worth fighting for. Even now, with bullets flying and your arm torn open, especially now." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I love you, Catherine Foster. I think I've loved you since that first morning when you stood in the schoolroom and faced down 12 reluctant students with nothing but determination and a worn copy of Shakespeare." The declaration, so simply stated yet so profound, stole Catherine's breath. "Preston, you don't have to say anything," he assured her. "I just wanted you to know." Catherine shook her head, a watery smile breaking through her tears. "You impossible man. Of course I love you too. How could I not?" His answering smile was like sunrise after the darkest night. With gentle pressure, he drew her down until their lips met in a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities, of a future worth fighting for. They spent a cold, uncomfortable night in the forest, taking turns keeping watch. By morning, Preston's fever had risen, and Catherine knew they needed to find help soon. "There's a homestead about 5 miles east of here," Preston said, his voice weaker than the day before. "Family named Weber. Good people. Can you make it that far?" Catherine asked doubtfully. Preston struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. "I'll make it." The journey was arduous, Preston leaning increasingly on Catherine as his strength ebbed. By the time the Weber homestead came into view, a sturdy cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, he was barely conscious. The Webers, a German immigrant couple with 3 young children, took them in without hesitation. Mrs. Weber, who had served as a nurse during the war, cleaned and treated Preston's wound while her husband kept watch for pursuers. "You are lucky," the older woman told Catherine as they sat by Preston's bedside later that evening. "The bullet, it did not hit bone or artery. But the infection, it is bad. He needs rest." "We don't have time for rest," Catherine said, explaining their situation in hushed tones. Mrs. Weber listened without judgment, then nodded decisively. "My husband, he will go to Cheyenne tomorrow. He will bring this Marshall Harmon to you." "It's too dangerous," Catherine protested. "Blackstone's men are looking for a man and woman together, yes? Not for a German farmer alone." Mrs. Weber patted her hand. "Do not worry. Carl knows the back trails. He will be safe." 2 days passed in anxious waiting. Preston's fever broke on the second night, bringing Catherine to tears of relief. By the 3rd morning, he was awake and alert, though still weak. "You had me worried," Catherine told him as she helped him sit up to take some broth. "Can't get rid of me that easily," he replied, his smile tired but genuine. "I don't want to get rid of you at all," she said softly. "Not ever." Preston's free hand found hers. "Is that a proposal, Miss Foster?" Catherine felt heat rush to her cheeks. Perhaps it is, Mr. Ivers. Then I accept, he said simply. Though traditionally, I believe I should be the one asking. When have we ever done things traditionally? Their laughter was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Catherine moved to the window, her heart in her throat as she counted 5 riders approaching the cabin. "It's all right," Mr. Weber called from outside. "It is Marshal Harmon." Relief flooded through Catherine. She turned back to Preston, joy lighting her features. "They're here. It's really happening." The next hours passed in a whirlwind of explanations and evidence. Marshal Harmon, a tall, stern-faced man with kind eyes, listened carefully to their story and examined the letters Preston had stolen. "This is enough to warrant an investigation," he said finally. "I'll send telegraphs to Kansas and have my deputies bring Blackstone in for questioning." "He won't come easily," Catherine warned. The marshal's smile was cold. "Men like Blackstone rarely do. But justice has a way of finding them eventually." It took 3 weeks for word to reach them at the Weber homestead. 3 weeks of healing, of planning, of learning to be together without fear shadowing every moment. When Marshal Harmon returned, his news was better than they had dared hope. "Blackstone's been arrested," he announced without preamble. "One of his men turned state's evidence. Confessed to setting the fire on Blackstone's orders. Seems he didn't appreciate being left to take the fall when things got hot." Catherine sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "It's over? Truly over?" "He'll hang for murder," the marshal confirmed. "You're free, Miss Foster. Free to go wherever you please, do whatever you wish." She looked at Preston, who had been standing quietly by the fireplace. "I know exactly where I want to be." The following spring found them back at the Rockingham Ranch, not as employees but as owners of a small parcel of land sold to them by Mr. Montgomery as a wedding gift. Their cabin, though modest, faced east to catch the sunrise that had come to mean so much to them both. On their first morning as husband and wife, Catherine woke to find Preston already dressed and waiting by the door with 2 saddled horses. "What's this?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. "I made you a promise once," he said, his eyes warm with love as he took her hand. "To ride every sunrise with you. I intend to keep it." Catherine rose on tiptoe to kiss him, her heart full to bursting. "I'll hold you to that, Preston Ivers. Every sunrise for the rest of our days." Hand in hand, they stepped out into the dawn light, ready to ride toward whatever horizon awaited them together.